What's going on, everybody? Welcome in to another member stream here, the Week 18 edition, the week that doesn't matter edition. See a few in the chat already. What's up, guys? T and Yella, HM, Austin. What's up, guys? Welcome in. Glad to see you all here right at the jump here. I guess I did a better job of actually announcing what it was going to be and being on time. So, shout out to me as well. Yeah, championship week in the books. Hope you guys did all right. I definitely heard from a few of you in the chat. As you guys know, I did not finish quite as well as I would have hoped in my finals this week. Had some frustrating, kind of bitter defeats. Just coping by doing an absolutely unreasonable number of playoff best ball drafts. So once all of those teams die, I don't know what I'm going to do to take the pain away. Probably startup drafts would be my guess. It's just sort of an endless cycle of perpetual coping and drafting. But yeah, I mean, I'm having fun with the best ball drafts. It's going to be exciting once everything gets kicked off because I've got a lot of teams. Just hoping, hit that perfect combo on one of them. But anyhow, we're moving on here, essentially the off season for our purposes. So it's time to kind of recalibrate ourselves to a different set of values. We don't care about who's scoring fantasy points right now. What we care about is who's going to gain value, who's going to hold value, where are the landmines, what are the things we want to avoid. And so that's something I take a little bit of time to get adjusted to. I find myself like so burnt out after the season's over, but I know, I do content now. So I'm working on getting my mind right for that. I did do the rankings update. And so, just about ready to dive in. I want to do kind of a full season recap next week. I think is that's going to be the video topic, sort of going through everything that happened, trying to make sense of this season, like in the context of the last several years. Are we seeing real shifts? Is this just variance? Trying to look into that stuff, but it will be an ongoing process. I've got 3 main topics today that all come from the suggestions here in the member stream area. So one request was for some quote unquote moonshot dynasty buys. So, I take that to mean players who have the potential to skyrocket in value, where you're taking on, you're taking on some level of risk. You're not assured of anything, but you're taking on this chance to gain a lot of value. So I've got some names written down for that at various price points. We're going to talk about the difference between half PPR and full PPR scoring a little bit and how that might impact your roster construction strategies. And then we'll talk about trade negotiations. How do I make trades? How do I try to get my foot in the door with offers? I don't think there's a perfect science to this, but I'll talk about some of the things that I have done. Just sort of go from there. Austin asks, are we taking a 26-second on the clock in a startup? Best options are 211, Shaheed, and Bateman. Yeah, I think I would probably take the 2026 second there. I just think there's a wider range of upside with that pick, and I think that at any point between now and the season, you can go ahead and trade a future second for a player that is comparable to a Shaheed or to a Bateman. I don't think that's either of those are guys that are going to see massive increases in value throughout the year. So I'd rather just have the flexibility of the pick. T says, random question, but thoughts on prospect performances such as Tyler Warren and Scat. Do any of these performances make you keep note of these guys in rookie drafts? So I really just don't watch college football like at all. My prospecting work is going to come through, through the numbers. It's going to come through people like JJ Zacharias, and I lean on pretty heavily. But when I'm looking at these prospects, what I'm mainly looking at is, things like peak season production, projected draft capital, efficiency in college, what's their strength of teammates, what's their strength of competition. I don't trust myself as a film evaluator because I can see a player on the field and say, hey, that guy looks sick. And that doesn't have any bearing on whether they're going to be good in the NFL. So I know Cam Scatabo has been like the big name the past few days. My take and I don't know what the combine is going to look like. I don't know how much buzz this guy is going to get. Obviously, he's on the rise, but he doesn't strike me as like a particularly athletic guy. I don't expect him to get significant draft capital. My guess is he's best case scenario, like a third round pick that you hope lands in a kind of a murky backfield. I don't know. I don't think I would see him much more favorably than like a Trey Benson type from last year. But again, I'm very early on. I don't know how this is going to shake out. And with running backs, especially, it's going to depend a lot on how the NFL feels about these players. So can't comment too much on him. Tyler Warren, he seems like a very strong prospect at first glance. Certainly nowhere near like the Brock Bowers stratosphere. My understanding is he's more of an all-around tight end. So the question is going to be, how much is he asked to block? How much is he able to be a pure receiving threat? When you are talking about these guys it's not bad to be a good blocker, but if you're going to go down like the George Kittle path, you have to be really, really good to offset the amount of snaps that you spend in as a blocker. And so, the big concern would be like, is he just Cole Kmet, right? That would be the question. Again, have not done enough digging into his market share numbers, his best season numbers to really give a full opinion on that. But I'm adding the prospect stuff to an ever-growing list of things I need to do now that the offseason is here. So let's jump into some of these moonshots. I'm going to start with the one that was already kind of thrown out as a name, so I'm not taking credit for this one, but I do think that Justin Fields does make sense, right? If your goal is saying, I'm going to kind of, basically I'm placing a wager, right? And I'm hoping for a bigger payout, right? Like I'm betting on, the bet is plus 500, whatever, plus 1,000, whatever the odds might be. The odds aren't great, but if it hits, the payout is decent. I think Fields does fit that criteria. He's 127th on Fantasy Calc right now. Honestly, I expected him to be a little bit lower, but he's around guys like Xavier Legette, Trey Benson, Will Levis, Jerome Ford, Keenan Allen. So I feel like to go and invest in him, that is not a high opportunity cost. There's a lot of guys in that range where you're not giving up very much. There's not a lot of value potential upside in a Ford or a Keenan Allen. A Xavier Legette, very, very boom bust at this point. I'd rather just take that risk on Justin Fields. Trey Benson now kind of blocked by the James Conner contract. He's looking like more of just a handcuff guy for next year. So I think it can make sense to invest in him. If you have a weaker quarterback room, maybe you have some aging guys like Stafford or Cousins or whomever, like it can make sense to add Fields. I don't think he's going to get a starting job. I think that the NFL has kind of decided what he is, similar to like a Jameis Winston, where like teams just don't bring him in to be a starter. He's probably better than some starters, but they've just decided this guy is not going to be the guy. So there's just no point in bothering. I kind of think that's where we are because of so many of the mistakes that he makes. So, whether he deserves a chance to start or not, I don't know. I don't think that he will, but I don't think it's cost you that much to take the shot there. But there are a few names that are actually even cheaper than that. So one guy that's kind of interesting right now, just because he's like so off the radar, would be Ben Sinnott. And Ben Sinnott, he was a second round pick last year or this past year to the Commanders, kind of a fullback tight end hybrid in college. So there's some concern here that this guy just doesn't actually play the position that we want. But the way that I mostly see it, it seems like Cliff Kingsbury has this undying infatuation with Zach Ertz. He did this exact same thing basically to Trey McBride, where he kept Trey McBride kind of behind Zach Ertz perpetually throughout his rookie year, even though he did have that high draft capital. Now, McBride did do a little bit more than Sinnott, who caught like 5 passes this year. That's not very encouraging. And I don't think Sinnott is likely at all to come anywhere close to what we've seen from McBride. He certainly wasn't that type of a prospect. But he's 160th right now on Fantasy Calc. He still has that draft capital, obviously. I suspect he probably gets some hype in the offseason because Zach Ertz is like 35 years old, 36 years old or whatever. And the team is either going to move on from him or he's going to retire, or there's just going to be, talk that he can't do it anymore. And Sinnott is tied to Jaden Daniels. He's tied to a very exciting quarterback. So, I think it's pretty easy to see how there could be like a hype cycle for Ben Sinnott in the offseason. And so whether or not he's ever actually going to pan out, I definitely see the way that you get from like buying Ben Sinnott for a third round pick right now and selling him for a second in May. Like that seems like a pretty obvious path for me. So not a bad guy to take a stab on for sure. And then somewhere in that same vein, I would also shout out Jalen Wright. Now, Jalen Wright might just suck. Genuinely, like, I don't know. But he's 172nd on Fantasy Calc. He was a 4th round pick, went in the same range as Tyrone Tracy, Bucky Irving, Ray Davis. And he's currently valued behind guys like Brenton Strange, Dalton Schultz, DeAndre Hopkins, like pretty bad players. I suspect Jalen Wright can be had for like a late third in some leagues. And there's no guarantee that he amounts to anything or that he pays off, but there is a very good chance that Raheem Mostert doesn't come back to the team. And that backfield behind Achane becomes wide open, right? And this is an offense that is fantasy friendly for running backs. So you're taking a shot basically that Wright survives the offseason and he actually enters next year as the direct backup to Achane. And so now you're looking at, pretty solid contingent guy, could get some buzz like in the best ball streets. People like to draft those high value handcuffs. So I can see a world where Jalen Wright increases his value. And then you obviously have that kind of injury upside there, where if anything, God forbid for my dynasty teams, happens to Devon Achane, now you potentially have that primary backup who can theoretically, contribute in all phases. So I think Jalen Wright's pretty interesting. I think the Dolphins offense could bounce back a bit next year. Their offensive line was just so terrible. I think it's more likely than not to improve in 2025. And then next guy on my list would be Cedric Tillman. He's possibly my favorite guy on the list right now. It's crazy how fast his rise and fall were, honestly. And I don't know what's going on with the guy. Like, I hope he's okay because he's missed so many games with this concussion. My hope is that the team just knows the season is over and doesn't need to put him back out there. Clearly, they are actively tanking because they're playing Dorian Thompson-Robinson and Bailey Zappi. But it is weird that he missed like 5 games because you'd think as a young player, they would want him out there getting reps. So that's the one kind of kink here in this idea with Cedric Tillman is just like, we have serious uncertainty about this guy's health. And if the team is that worried, if the team is worried about his ability to play, to manage these concussion issues, that could be a problem. However, he is currently 159th on Fantasy Calc. So he's pretty low. He's in the same zone as Sinnott. He's like one spot ahead of Sinnott. He is just ahead of Jalen Wright. He had an insane 3-game stretch where he was the wide receiver 1 in fantasy. And some of that was due to Jameis Winston, just absolute insane volume. But you have Matt Harmon was saying, like, this isn't a fluke. This guy is getting open. Nothing about what he's doing is manufactured. He had the high target shares. He had the high yards per out run. He was scoring touchdowns. Like, there was no, like, I guess there is some level of Travis Fulgham risk here. But honestly, it was more impressive, I think, than Fulgham's run. He has more of a background where he was like a decent college prospect who just fell a bit because of injuries. So there's more to it here with Tillman breaking out as a year 2 guy after the Amari Cooper trade sort of opened up that X receiver role. I just think he's a great guy to take a shot on. Like, if you can get him for anything less than a second at this point, I just think it makes a lot of sense to see what happens. Maybe they add more wide receiver power in the draft and he just sort of fades away, but maybe they don't, right? And maybe they do actually go out and get themselves a decent quarterback. Like if they go out and get Kirk Cousins in the offseason or something, it's possible. You know, there's upside here for sure. The market was ready to crown this guy as like a legit wide receiver, and then the injury happened and he just sort of fell away. But he was gaining serious value. He was being traded for like early second round picks. So I don't think it's that crazy to think that he could get back to that point. Yeah, I mean Winston certainly gives you a better odds of producing than like a Deshaun Watson type. The main thing with Winston is just that he throws the ball like crazy. He was averaging over 40 attempts per game. So everybody's stats are a little bit inflated. Like Jerry Jeudy was good and has been good, but his targets per out run wasn't even that high when he was dominating fantasy because he was running so many routes and Winston was just throwing the ball like crazy. So it does inflate things a bit, and whoever is playing quarterback for them probably going to throw the ball less. But that doesn't mean that Tillman and Jeudy can't be productive in the future. But not if they're going to bring back Watson. If they're bringing back Watson again, then, I mean, just give up, honestly, on all the Browns. All right, my last two guys are a little bit more expensive, but I think there's just a lot of potential value upside here. So, you know, still varying degrees of risk here, but you're trying to hit big on that player who's going to shoot up the rankings. So another guy would be Keon Coleman. He's currently ranked 100th overall on Fantasy Calc. He's after Zach Charbonnet. He's after Cooper Kupp. He's after Aaron Jones. I have him 78th in the rankings right now, in that early second range. And Fantasy Calc does include picks, so he's probably a few spots higher than 100th. But yeah, I mean, I think this is a guy like the Bills are heading into the playoffs. So that means every game they play from here on is in prime time. They could potentially play 4 playoff games because they don't have the bye. They're very much live to go to the Super Bowl. So that's a lot of time for Keon Coleman to impress people on national TV in a wide receiver room that just lacks serious talent. And I've seen him make some sick plays, right? And he's been better than I kind of expected him to be, especially in terms of efficiency. You know, we remember, I mean, maybe you weren't all playing Dynasty when this happened, but like Gabe Davis caught 4 touchdowns in the AFC Championship game, and people lost their freaking minds. They were drafting him in like the 5th round on Underdog the next year. And so Keon Coleman is like a better version of Gabe Davis. He's much more impressive as a rookie. He's got better peripherals. He has a better prospect profile. I think he has more upside. So to be able to buy him now and just sort of free roll the next 4 weeks and just see maybe he has a huge breakout game in the playoffs, that's pretty tantalizing, right? I was not incredibly sold on Coleman as a prospect. I'm not saying he's destined to be a wide receiver 1 or even be that great in fantasy, but again, at his current price, like I think he's probably going to hold that type of value through the offseason unless the Bills like add crazy levels of competition at wide receiver. People are going to sell themselves on big wide receiver plays with Josh Allen. Again, I think people want to believe in that. See, you know, I love Olave and I think he's a good buy. I don't know if I view him as a moonshot necessarily, just because people kind of know what he is at this point. I think he's just like a safe investment who's going to gradually gain value throughout the offseason. So definitely a guy I'm targeting. Wouldn't fit him into this category, but absolutely love Olave as a buy. The last guy here for the moonshots would be Trevor Lawrence. Now, he's already listed as a top 50 asset on Fantasy Calc. He's 49th. So the upside here, like the amount that you can gain realistically in the offseason is capped for sure. But I think he was already kind of on track to be one of my favorite quarterback targets this offseason, just because I think that he is a good quarterback. I think his circumstances have been pretty terrible, and he continues to produce, you know, fine, like high-end QB2, fringy QB1 type of numbers. And he's very young and he has a big contract and he's not going anywhere. He's got Brian Thomas. Like, he's just going to be a safe quarterback to go and get on the cheap if you really want to go and do that. The only question is whether the eventual upside, his fantasy ceiling, is going to pay off the price. But there's not like any real risk with buying Lawrence. So I think that was already going on. But now you have this noise that Ben Johnson to the Jaguars is essentially a done deal. Now, I don't know if I believe that, but it's been reported at least by two different people. And if that does happen, if Ben Johnson does go to the Jaguars, that is going to create a level of hype that is different from, I think, anything we've seen in the Trevor Lawrence era. I think people are going to sell themselves again on Trevor Lawrence, convince themselves that he can succeed, and it was actually just, the offensive system. Because the thing is, people want to believe in Ben Johnson so bad, they're going to have to, if they don't want to buy into Lawrence, they're going to have to then say, well, Ben Johnson actually isn't that good. They're going to have to say that Goff is the reason that the Lions offense has been so good. And I don't think that people are willing to admit that. And I don't think it's necessarily true. I mean, I do think that there is something to Johnson in the same way that there's something to Kevin O'Connell, or there's something to Kyle Shanahan as far as making things easier for a quarterback. I think that Ben Johnson can absolutely do that, and I think he has some decent pieces already to work with in Jacksonville. So that would be pretty sweet. I'd love to see it. And honestly, I'd like to go out and get a few more shares of Lawrence because I think that has a good chance of happening. All right. Let me just go ahead and answer this here. Austin says, curious why you have Shaheed and Bateman ranked over Pearsall as a first-round pick. Yeah, I mean, after this most recent game, maybe I didn't course correct quite enough with Pearsall. However, like, his production to this point has been kind of insanely bad, and I understand that he got shot. It's hard to kind of know exactly how much impact that has. Like, it makes some sense that could be impacting him. But that being said, he's been running, a decent number of routes. And if we go back prior to this game against Detroit, his stat lines: 4 for 37, 1 for 16, 1 for 5, 0 receptions, 0 receptions, 0 receptions. He had one game over 38 receiving yards prior to that week 17 explosion. So it's a promising performance for sure, but not super sold on Pearsall, really. Bateman was also a first round pick. Bateman has definitely performed better than Pearsall has this year by a good bit. Shaheed was also performing incredibly well prior to his injury. So I think there's an argument there. I do kind of agree with you. I think at this point, heading into the offseason with Pearsall coming off such a big game, Shaheed being injured, I suspect Pearsall is the one who has more of a path to growing his value, and I should probably go ahead and make that swap. But it has not been very encouraging from Ricky so far. Yeah, I'm confused about the Lawrence year too. I genuinely just think that the Press Taylor offensive system is very, very uninventive. Lawrence was also dealing with like the most wide receiver drops in the NFL. He had not very good line play. The run game has been very inconsistent. I don't know, just a lot of like different factors that have really forced him to struggle a bit, but I do still think he can put it all together at some point. I mean, let's put it this way, right? CJ Stroud this year has been worse than any year of Trevor Lawrence's career. So if we're making excuses for Stroud, why not? Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Like, Pearsall's interesting for this reason with competition clearing out. It's part of why I like Jennings so much. I did really like Juwan Jennings because he was so cheap to acquire, and he's performed so well in this offense, and he is under contract as well. So I don't know. I don't know which one of them ends up being more productive. Jennings has certainly been the more productive one recently, but his upside is more capped, being an older guy, 27 years old already. So I definitely get taking the shot on Pearsall. All right, let's go ahead and talk about the next topic here, which was asked about half PPR versus PPR scoring. The question being, is it better in half PPR to have a hero RB or zero RB strategy with wide receiver scoring suppressed? So I'll say just right off the top, like, I don't necessarily subscribe to one exact roster construction strategy at all times. I'm willing to let the market, both the macro market and the micro market, dictate what type of roster I'm building. So when I say the macro market, I'm just saying, what is the dynasty landscape as a whole doing? If everybody is trying, like, if everybody's goal is to just get stud wide receivers and build around wide receivers, I will take discounts on stud running backs, and I will build my team around running backs, or I'll build my team around quarterbacks. That's fine. If the market is going to swing back the other direction this offseason and say it's all about running backs, I'm not going to go pay a premium for, all these mid running backs that are going to get pushed up. I will go and build my team around star wide receivers, get myself a superstar tight end, whatever I have to do to fight against kind of the current narrative or the current idea of how to build rosters. Now, that's not to say that people are going to be wrong in those assumptions. It's just, if the market's going to push so far one way that the prices become a little out of control or whatever, I'm not necessarily going to just go all in on that, especially if I'm trying to put together a team without sacrificing all of my roster value. But in half PPR, it is true that the running back scoring, especially this year, has been pretty dramatically better than the wide receiver scoring. So I did go ahead and look at one of my leagues that's half PPR, and it's actually 6-point passing touchdowns, which I know this question's not about quarterbacks, but if you play in a 6-point passing touchdown league that's half PPR, the quarterback scoring is so dramatically greater than the other positions. You really want to make that a priority of your strategy, is trying to get those star quarterbacks. You look at this, there were 8 quarterbacks that scored more points than any other player at any other position. So in this league, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, Baker Mayfield, Jaden Daniels, Jared Goff, Jalen Hurts, Sam Darnold all scored more points than Saquon Barkley, who was the next highest scoring, or was the highest scoring non-quarterback. And then right after that, you have another run of 5 quarterbacks: Patrick Mahomes, Bo Nix, Brock Purdy, Jordan Love, Tua Tagovailoa, in terms of points per game, that all scored more than Jamar Chase, who was next. So if you're in a 6-point league, half-point PPR, go out and offer the world for Lamar, Allen, Burrow, Daniels, Hurts. Those guys, you want to get them on your team. But as far as the running back versus wide receiver point, within the top 40 scorers in this league in points per game, only 4 were wide receivers. It was Jefferson, Chase, Higgins, and Chris Godwin. So, wide receiver scoring in half PPR, it's heavily driven by touchdowns, which are pretty spotty, pretty unpredictable for the most part. And it's hard to really rack up those points on receptions when they're all cut in half. So you have Amon-Ra St. Brown, Puka Nacua, who are incredibly productive wide receivers. They were outside the top 40 scorers in this league. Meanwhile, there were 10 running backs in the top 40. Barkley, Henry, Gibbs, Bijan, Mixon, Jacobs, Kamara, Taylor, Cook, and Kyron. So, it seems pretty clear that you do want to invest in those high-end running backs, especially because there is a scarcity at the position, right? There's more scarcity at high-end running backs than there is with wide receivers. The high-end wide receivers are also scarce, but the idea of these high-end running backs that are getting that volume, they are pretty scarce. And if you think of those names that I just listed, those guys didn't really come out of nowhere, right? All of those running backs were going pretty early on underdog. really the only ones that you could get outside of the top 5 rounds were Mixon and Kamara. Mixon was like right on that 5-6 turn. Kamara was like 6-7, and there was some worries about his contract, or like I don't remember if the suspension thing was this year or last year, but there was underdog hates running backs, and then all these guys were still going fairly early. So it's not like you're just finding these running backs anywhere. These high volume guys are pretty scarce, and it's heavily driven. And because half PPR is so heavily driven by volume and touchdowns, it's pretty predictable which running backs are going to be the guys that you want. So there are players that came out of the woodwork, like Chuba Hubbard, like Bucky Irving, guys that filled in for stretches as well that were productive. Walker was obviously really good for part of the year and then fell off. But yeah, I mean, I think that you do want to prioritize running back more in that format. I think it is fair to say that if you're working off of rankings for PPR scoring, which mine are, it's fair to bump up some of those running backs a little bit, at least the ones that are capable of really making a difference, right? The ones that are capable of being like top 40 overall scorers in fantasy, right? Not just, I wouldn't go overpaying for like the Brian Robinsons of the world, because those guys are still largely replaceable. There's a lot of options where you can go out and find yourself like 12 points per game or whatever. But when it comes to those high end guys, I think it is reasonable to say I'm going to move up Bijan. I'm going to move up Henry. Not Henry. He's old, but like Taylor is a guy that seems more valuable in that format. Kyron Williams seems more valuable in that format. So yeah, that would be my answer. I wouldn't go crazy, but I would try to make that more of a foundation of my strategy for sure. All right. Last bit for today, talk about trade negotiations. This is like more of a psychological thing than anything. And I think it's very case by case, person by person. So I will try to be concise, but I feel like it's something that I actually, when I kind of sat down to think about it without actually being in the process of sending out a lot of offers, I did struggle a little bit to kind of put it all into practice here. But the first thing I'll say, just because it was directly asked, I don't subscribe to the send your best offer first mentality. I do respect it. People that do that, I totally respect that. I don't personally think that it's necessary. I don't think it's disrespectful to send, a decent offer that's not necessarily saying I'm going all in. Now, if you're worried that someone else is going to come in and steal your trade opportunity, or you just happen to know that this manager is more likely to respond favorably to that kind of a, aggressive approach, go for it. But I don't necessarily go for that. What I do try to avoid, I don't send insultingly low offers. First of all, because I just don't want to be annoying, but also because it just doesn't really work very often. Like maybe you'll get lucky sometimes and someone will fall for it, but people don't really, most managers aren't going to fall for these insanely bad offers that you're going to send, especially the ones where you send a bunch of garbage for one good player. Nobody wants like 5 guys off of your bench for a star player. Like it's not really a practical thing. Don't send them a screenshot of keep trade cut saying that it's fair. You want to include at least one asset that the other manager might want in the deal. Like at least find one thing that they reasonably need, or if they say they like a player on your team, maybe then you can try to take that player and then, add some fluff to try to get an upgrade. That's fine. But don't just send them a bunch of garbage. Now, yeah. Half the offers I receive are them just hoping I click accept by accident. Yeah, don't send those offers, right? I'm not afraid to send a lowball offer if there's a player whose value has really taken a hit. And people have benefited from this, right? You go out and send a third for Bryce Young, all of a sudden you're looking great, right? And maybe there were probably some managers, even when Bryce Young got benched, who would have been like, yeah, right, I'm not trading him for a third. What are you, crazy? Like I paid the 104 for this guy. But other people would have accepted. And so I think when there's a lot of like split opinion on a player, it doesn't hurt to go out and just see, hey, are you totally done with this guy? Because like I'll take a shot. I've done that with like AD Mitchell. Jury's still out on whether I'll regret that. Juwan Jennings was a player because he had such low brand equity already. When he started performing, some people were just, it was like found money, right? They didn't really have any, they didn't have any loyalty to Juwan Jennings. And so I did buy him for like a third and a fourth in one league or a third in another league. So I think it can make sense to send low ball offers when there is split opinion or a player doesn't really have a set value. What side would you take, Caleb or Dak plus a 26 first, a 26 third, and a 27 second? Oh, brother. Oh, gosh. Caleb Williams, dude. That's a good question. That's a tough question, actually. I want to take Dak. I want to take Dak. I think the value is on the Dak side slightly. It's about one. Dak I have at 1 base 1. Caleb right on that 2 verge. So yeah, I mean I'd say a 26 first, third, and a 27 second. That's probably equivalent to a base 1, maybe a little bit more than a base 1, depending on the quality of that team that has the pick. So yeah, I think it's reasonable for sure. I think it's reasonable to take Prescott there. Yeah, look, I'll take the L on buying Bryce Young. Obviously, trading Tank Bigsby for Bryce Young was a great idea. I think people are going to get over their skis on Bryce Young very quickly, and that's fine because buying into him on the cheap gives you that opportunity to be flexible and potentially trade him later. So, yeah, I mean, I'm just gonna have to hold the L on that one. I did not foresee the midseason benching for Andy Dalton, followed by the career renaissance down the stretch throwing to Adam Thielen. That was not on my bingo card. So it goes. All right. The other question was sort of like getting more trades done in general. So first of all, I think that sending DMs is sort of an underused strategy. A lot of times I will send an offer and then I will send a message along with the offer that's just kind of like, hey, I'm interested in this player. Let me know if this works or we can talk about other guys. Or if I'm selling a player, I'll send an offer where I'm trading them that player. And then it's like, hey, do you have any interest in this guy? Like we can negotiate something else. So just giving them flexibility, letting them know right off the bat, hey, I'll work with you. If there's something that's mutually beneficial here, I'm willing to find out what that is. So I think I do that sometimes. Some people don't check their messages. Some people aren't going to be responsive, but I have found that having a little bit of a back and forth can definitely lead to a deal. You can get to know what the other person actually wants, what they value, which brings me to sort of a further point, which is really, I think, the most important point is if you can, try to get to know your league mates. Try to pay attention to the moves they make. Try to understand their tendencies a little bit. Some people prioritize immediate production. Some people obsess about certain positions, right? Some people want tight ends really badly. Some people need to have all these running backs. Some people just want rookie picks, and some people hate their rookie picks and trade them away as soon as they have the opportunity. So I do think that is an underrated tactic as well, is just sort of getting to know your league mates, not necessarily trying to force a square peg into a round hole, but instead using their tendencies against them. T says, is it bad that most of my trades require a lot of negotiation and time to get done? I mean, not necessarily. It depends on if it's you or the people you're dealing with. I do think sometimes people get a little bit too crazy with the I like the deal, but you add a fourth on my side, or give me this little thing on the sometimes it's not worth it to haggle over those tiny little details. And if the trade is close enough that you just want a fourth to get it done, you should probably just take the trade at that point. So that would be my general take. But sometimes it helps to just get back to basics with this stuff. If you're making a trade with someone, ideally you're filling a need for them, right? People are most incentivized to engage with you, to send a counter offer, to give you the time of day if you are offering something that they need. And so this works the easiest with contenders and rebuilders. That's probably half my trades is I'm a contender and I'm trading with a rebuilder, or I'm a rebuilder, I'm trading with a contender. And I'm trying to find opportunities to make a mutually beneficial swap where they get something that theoretically they need more than me, future value. I'm getting something that I need more than them, which would be points. That is the easiest way to get a quick deal done. You can also do this across positions. Hey, I've got a bunch of running backs. You've got a bunch of wide receivers. How about I upgrade one of my running backs and I'll take a downgrade at wide receiver and vice versa. And we can both make our teams a little bit stronger. I think that's a good way to do deals. But yeah, I mean, if you can fill a need for someone, it's always great if you can find someone that like wants the player that you don't want. That's great. But doing things to fill needs, I think, still remains the simplest way to get a deal done. And then finally, the last thing I'll say about trades right now is if you have a player and you know that you are above the market on a certain player or you're below the market, you can try to use that to your advantage and make creative offers where you're basically taking advantage of the value of a player because you don't believe in that value. I guess you'd call it a sell high, basically. It's kind of like merging a sell high and a buy low. So like one example of this I think is pretty good. I was rising on Trey McBride. I was like, this guy's insane. He's distancing himself from other tight ends. I think he's like a top 24 asset in tight end premium. And then Chase Brown at the same time was sort of breaking out, but people weren't sure what to do with it because he's a 5th round pick. There's uncertainty there with the future. But I was rising on both these guys. And so I was able to send out an offer of Jonathan Taylor, David Njoku, and a very late first. It ended up being the 109 actually. But anyway, Taylor, Njoku, and the 109 for McBride and Chase Brown. And at the time, I was kind of down on Taylor. And I was like, this guy still has name value, right? He's still Jonathan Taylor. I'm going to send out Taylor and see if I can go ahead and get a running back in Chase Brown, who I think has a chance to outscore him the rest of the season. Didn't end up working that way, but I did still win the championship in that league. And then I can actually upgrade from Njoku to McBride, which was really my primary objective there. So I'm trying to upgrade my tight end, and I take a perceived downgrade at running back, which actually doesn't hurt me in the short term because I'm getting that production. So there's a lot of moving parts there. But I think that is, if you want to try to like hit that next level of trade psychology, I guess, that would be something you can consider is like, think about how other people value the players on your team, put yourself in their shoes, and then see, what is a plausible way, what's the plausible way I can frame this where it seems like they're getting something that they want. T-Hum says, I got the offer up to Caleb and a 27 seconds for Dak plus 2 first. Yeah, I mean, absolutely take that. That's way better. Getting 2 first there is huge. I actually love that deal. So you have my full blessing on that. I just traded away McBride plus Chase Brown for Bowers. I wanted a share of him. I think that's fair. I could see that either way, honestly. I do think McBride is rising and deserves to be... he's alone in that second tier, but I do think Bowers is just like on a whole other level. So I think that's a fine deal. How do you feel about Brees? Do you trust him to come around along with the Jets offense to see a guy you're moving? I'm not moving him right now just because his value feels pretty suppressed compared to like his peak ceiling value. And I don't really see how anything can happen in the offseason that's going to hurt his value. The Jets organization is already a disaster. Aaron Rodgers is as bad of a quarterback right now as they could possibly have next season. They're not going to invest in another running back. They have 2 competent backups in Isaiah Davis and Braylon Allen. Brees Hall himself, I still believe is like a superstar talent who can do everything. So I just see no reason to trade Brees Hall right now. I don't see any way that he can become less valuable in the next 6 months. So I'm gonna let people forget about the bad taste in their mouth from this season, sell themselves on Hall again. He's going to probably be like a late first, early second round pick again in redraft leagues. So I'll have to decide at a later date if I actually believe in his production this year. Like, we'll see what the Jets do. But as far as his dynasty value, I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon. So I'm cool to just sit on that. Anyway, guys, let me know if you got any other questions here. We'll wrap this up otherwise in a minute or so. It's been good. I appreciate the suggestions. Those were some good topics to talk about. It made it easier for me to structure the show. I hope it was a little bit better than some of the recent weeks where I feel like I've been rambling a little bit. I did actually come prepared with some notes, so definitely want to provide value for you guys. You're the MVPs. You carry the channel, so trying to step up my game here in the off season with the members only content. I will be, like I said, I will be coming out with a big main video next week, probably a full season recap. We'll have another member stream as well, and yeah, we'll get to enjoy the NFL playoffs. So I'm excited to sit back and watch those games. Not that I don't have anything riding on them, but it'll be a little bit different than my normal sweats. All right, we'll close it out with this. How do you feel about trade deadlines? Oh, I'm very much for them. I used to be against trade deadlines, and then I was sort of indifferent. Jacob Sanderson convinced me this offseason, or not this offseason, this season. He had a Substack post about why trade deadlines are good, and I did agree with it. And the idea here is that at the end of the day, it's not that one is fair or unfair because everybody plays in the same league. Everybody has the same rules. But leagues with no trade deadlines have different incentives than leagues that do have trade deadlines. So if there is no deadline, the incentive is basically to just play to compete for as long as you possibly can, and then just pivot at the last moment and trade away all of your valuable players to other teams. And the reason this kind of sucks is because the fun thing about Dynasty is that you have to make decisions about your team. You have to decide, are you in or are you out? And you have to plan accordingly to benefit yourself the most in either scenario. You have to either plan to tank at the 101, you have to plan to build your contending team in time for the playoffs. And the idea of no trade deadline, it sort of takes away all of that like push and pull of competing incentives. And I actually think it leads to less trading, or it leads to players, it actually leads to the players that need the trades the most not benefiting. Because if you think about contenders, when a contender has a trade deadline and they know they can't add any more players, they are more likely to go out and buy a player that they don't need preemptively as like an insurance policy heading into the playoffs. If they don't need a player, then what they're going to do is two things. One, they're only going to make trades for like high-end superstar players that they know are going to help them immediately. And rebuilders don't have a lot of those. So you can get stuck sitting on like a Jacoby Myers or a Rashad White or whoever that you might have actually been able to trade to a contender. But the second thing they're going to do is they're going to wait until the last possible moment to go out and actually make that trade. They're not going to go out and buy that piece they need until the week that they need that player. And they're only going to shop. They're only going to be buying, you know, a small number of players. And a lot of those good options are going to be on the better teams, potentially the teams that just missed the playoffs or the teams that just got eliminated in the first round of the playoffs. And so it's actually going to benefit them more than the teams that are rebuilding, the teams that are at the bottom of the standings that need those trades. So I think that the no deadline thing doesn't really help anybody outside of the top contenders. And it just helps them to be lazy and to be, it helps them to put off making trades, and it lets them sort of bail themselves out. So you could, yeah, again, exactly what you're saying here. You could buy Henry for one playoff game, you could lose and then sell him to someone else. And again, if you're in a league with no deadline, you should do that. Like, you should take advantage of the league format that you're in. It's not unethical to play Dynasty that way in a league without a deadline, and you're going to serve yourself better to take advantage of the incentive structures in your league. But I personally enjoy playing more in leagues that do have that deadline. I like it when it's either right before the playoffs or at the earliest in week 13. But I like when, at least in the playoffs, you can't trade. So you have to, you have to dance with who brung you to the dance, and that forces you to plan ahead. It forces trades to get done earlier, and I think ultimately it does get more trades done, and especially deals that can benefit those rebuilding teams. So that would be my full take on it. All right. I will talk to you guys very soon. I'll be in the member chat. You can always hit me up. Hope you guys enjoy this weekend. I'm personally looking forward to watching Lions Vikings. Other than that, a lot of pretty mid games. Eagles playing all backups, so that's not going to be too exciting. But anyway, football is football, right? I will talk to you guys later. Hope you have a good night.